You're listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Keane. I'm the editor-in-chief of the internationally renowned journal Fire Ecology. Today, we have a very special thing when you join us in Fire Ecology Chats. Fire Ecology has adopted social fire science research, and we have one of the papers that is in that kind of category. And we have three of the authors of the paper. The paper we're going to be talking about today is Wildfire Research and Mental Health, Impacts, Reflections, and a Call to Action. And today, we have Sarah, Nelly, and Carolyn. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having us on this podcast. My name is Sarah Dickson-Hoyle. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow with the Center for Wildfire Coexistence at the University of British Columbia. And I'm really excited to be joining you to talk about this really important topic of mental health.
Welcome aboard the Fire Ecology train. I'm so glad social scientists are starting to submit to the paper. It's wonderful. Nelly, you're next.
I'm Nelly Oelke. I'm an associate professor at the School of Nursing at UBC Okanagan, and I also work with the Rural Coordination Centre of BC. I'm a co-author on the paper, and my contributions certainly are around rural mental health, and particularly also the impacts of climate change hazards on rural communities.
And Carolyn.
I'm Carolyn Szostak. I'm an associate professor of psychology, also at the University of British Columbia at the Okanagan campus. And I was a co-author on the paper. And my role is really looking at research on rural communities and mental health impacts of climate change, but also working with rural mental health service providers. I do a lot of student supervision, so this issue has come really front and center there. And then finally, I'm chair of our research ethics board and really trying to promote more awareness of the risks to researchers in this area.
Well, welcome to three of you. Really appreciate the time you're dedicating to do this podcast. Sarah, can you tell us a little about the motivation behind the paper?
Sure. This paper was really motivated by my own experience. And, you mentioned just now that this paper is in this social science stream, but I really want to emphasize, as someone who's both a fire ecologist and a social scientist, this is an issue that really is affecting everyone in the fire community, whether you're a natural scientist, a social scientist, a first responder, a practitioner. So this paper was actually motivated by my own experience as a graduate student working in interior British Columbia and doing fieldwork both with First Nation communities and then also out on the land, monitoring ecosystem recovery after some of the big megafires we've seen, and having some really challenging experiences of working closely in partnership with communities, conducting interviews where I was hearing these stories of evacuation and these really challenging experiences, and then going out in the midst of 2021, this megafire season, and actually experiencing that firsthand, this anxiety of supporting my field crew, trying to keep us safe as there were communities evacuating all around, watching some of the communities that I had conducted interviews with going through that experience again, and really feeling this sense of helplessness and guilt that I wasn't able to support them, that I didn't have the capacity or skills as a firefighter, for example, but really feeling like I didn't have the resources or the support, despite having really wonderful supervisors, to really help me work through some of those experiences. And it really came to a head maybe a year later as I was writing up my dissertation. I really started to feel the weight of that. What I came to realize was this secondary trauma and some of those traumatic experiences that we'd gone through. So it really motivated me to think, okay, what can we do to better support all researchers, but particularly students who are entering into this really challenging space of wildfire research? And I'm so grateful to my co-authors, Nelly and Carolyn, and also Francisca, how we've been able to come together to really advocate for change within our respective institutions and the wildfire community more broadly.
Well, thank you for writing the paper. I really enjoy reading it and understanding, a lot of times we just kind of ignore the mental health issue, and that paper really brought it to the forefront. Nelly, can you tell us a little more about the broad impacts of fire on the rural communities and their mental health?
Sure. So rural communities are definitely more impacted with climate change hazards, so including fires, but also flooding, which is a direct cause oftentimes from wildfires, and heat events as well. And the other thing is that rural communities have limited resources, particularly in healthcare and in mental health. And so both the number of resources they have and in today's day day and age where there's a lack of healthcare providers. That's another issue that is experienced more broadly in rural communities. And lastly, rural populations, there are inequities. Their socioeconomic status is less than urban communities, and they have higher rates of chronic disease, and transportation is an issue to get healthcare services outside of the community. There just are a lot of challenges. So mental health is an issue that arises. I remember, as an example, a community that Carolyn and I actually both worked with, where they were experiencing significant flooding, and due to an atmospheric river that happened during that time. This was still into the end of June. But the problem was that across the road, the fire season also started. So they had dual situations and were impacted significantly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I imagine to deal with this whole idea of mental health issue, it's going to have to go up and down the fire management community. So, Carolyn, can you tell us what the roles of the supervisors and everybody else in fire management should be to address this mental health issue?
First, I think supervisors, fire management, one, they need to promote their own awareness of the impacts of wildfires on mental health. As a researcher, I'm immersed in the stories of community members, mental health service providers who live in these rural communities as well. And I live in a place that has been very affected by climate change events, flooding, and certainly wildfires. And so a lot of the students who work with me are very interested in looking at the impacts of wildfires on mental health, but they've also gone through these experiences themselves, and they're not always aware of how it may be really challenging, how they may be a bit more vulnerable to some of the stories as well. And so as a supervisor, I think I'm also responsible to really help promote their awareness and to help them process their experiences. I also serve as a research ethics chair for our institutional board, and I've been working with our board to really help promote awareness. So we get a number of protocols that concern wildfires, and more we're really working with the researchers to make sure that they've been giving thought to how they might be affected by this research.
Sarah, you can wrap this all up by telling us what happens when we don't assess the impact of mental health on this. What is the paper going to provide for the solution?
Yeah, I really want to point to that last piece in this paper title. We're talking about impacts. We share some of our own reflections, but really this is a call to action. And that's why we wanted it in this journal in Fire Ecology, because we really want this to be reaching the broader fire community. And I think we're really seeing from everything that Nelly, Carolyn, and I have shared, if we're not caring for ourselves, if we're not caring for each other, and if we're not caring for the communities that we're increasingly partnering on research, these impacts are wide-ranging. It'll impact our own ability to be able to engage productively and ethically in our work. It impacts our ability to mentor and bring in, whether it's students, early career researchers, or junior folks. We're already seeing recruitment challenges in wildland firefighting. So we're going to see some of those retention issues. And then again, impacts on the communities that we're working with. There's increasing calls for researchers to be partnering in these collaborative and ethical ways and to be conducting trauma-informed research. But if we're experiencing those traumatic impacts ourselves and not able to care for ourselves and adequately address those potential impacts, that really impacts our ability to engage in those ways with communities. So I really want to highlight again, this is something that is affecting everyone in the wildfire community. There is increasing attention to these impacts on first responders, rightly so, but the impacts on us as researchers, I think, really hasn't been getting the attention it deserves. And that's both for researchers conducting social science, like I've talked about, sitting with interview transcripts, but also folks who just care about the natural world, going out into these burnt landscapes and having to engage day by day with data that talk to the impacts of these mega fires on plants, on animals, and on the places that we just care about. So really, it's a call to action to advocate within your organization, within your institution, and really call for that institutional change, but also create these communities of care with the groups that we're all working in.
Such an important issue. Really want to thank you three for coming aboard today and giving us a fire ecology chat. Sarah, do you want to recognize any of your co-authors or any other people that contributed to the study, including funding agencies?
Of course, I really want to start by acknowledging our co-author, Francisca Oquika Santana, who couldn't be here today, who really was so brave in sharing her own story of working through some of these impacts and her own connection to communities in Northern California. And then I think really I just have to acknowledge the field crews that I've been working with, the communities that I've been working with, and my own communities, friends and family who have been such a great support. I think, again, it's only through building these communities in our own lives and then in our workspaces that we can really work through these issues together.
For those of you listening, if this really interests you, you know what? You can download this paper for free. Yep, for free. That's because these three wonderful people have paid the freight for you to download the paper because Fire Ecology is an open source journal. So please, I will tell you this, that these three left a lot of information in the paper and you should download it if you want to really get in and find out about mental health and fire management. And with that, please tune in to the next Fire Ecology Chats.
Thank you for listening to Fire Ecology Chats, a podcast series by the Association for Fire Ecology. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our show and leave us a review. To learn more about fire ecology and support our future work by becoming a member, visit fireecology.org. FireEcology.org.